It's exactly what I say all the time. Clutter is just the symptom. It's not the root. And my job, if I'm doing my job well, my goal is to challenge you, inspire you, whether I'm working with you one-on-one, whether you're listening to this podcast or my podcast or reading a book or whatever. My responsibility, my promise is that I want to try to help you to understand where that comes from, because otherwise you just keep drinking from a fire hose. It's like someone who just goes to the doctor or they just keep taking Tylenol every time they get a headache. Well, you might need glasses, and maybe the headaches will stop when you get to the root of the problem. And so if we can figure out where that's coming from, then it's easier to change the behavior. And the other thing is, I see so much shame from people. They treat clutter like it's their dirty little secret. And, it doesn't help with social media and everything that we curated things that we see around us, that people just tend to feel like they're not measuring up. But there is a connection. And I don't want people to feel, if they're shameful about their space, how that translates to how they feel about themselves.
Welcome to the Paul Croswell audio experience.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. This is your host, Paul Croswell, and you're in the right place. Listen, if you struggle with decluttering or getting organized or finding a way to do either of those things that worked well for you, then this is where you need to be, because my guest today is Laurie Palau. She's an author and the founder of Simply Be Organized, where she writes, teaches, and works with people of all ages to help them declutter, work smarter, and live happier. Doesn't that sound great? Now, Laurie is also the host of the popular podcast titled This Organized Life, a weekly show where she connects with guests about their life, their work, parenting, and the role that organizing plays in all of that. In our conversation today, she shares her personal philosophy about living an organized life, practical advice on decluttering, and she demystifies the process of getting organized and staying organized. I'll also add that if you happen to be a personality type junkie like myself or Laurie, then you'll also enjoy how she incorporates the Enneagram personality assessment into what she does. Although it's not necessary, it's just really cool. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Laurie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. I said this off air, but I'm excited about what we're gonna dive into. I think there's a lot to unpack, and I think there's a lot of benefit in what you do for just about everyone. But before we get to that, I like to start off each of these episodes simply by asking, how are you doing today? How are you?
Well, thank you for asking. That's such a nice question. I'm actually doing really well today. So it's beautiful. I live in Eastern Pennsylvania, and so we are starting to get a little hint of seasons here
Nice.
right now. And it's beautiful. Like it's that, you can almost have a sweatshirt on in the morning, but then still have it be warm in the afternoon. So that
Yeah.
always kind of sets my mood in a good place.
I always tell my wife I think fall is my favorite season.
Oh, it's absolutely my favorite season. Yeah.
It's absolutely perfect. And we used to live in New Jersey before we moved to South
Oh,
Carolina.
what part of New Jersey?
So central around like
Where?
the Scotch Plains, Westfield, Plainfield
Oh, I
area.
used to live in Maplewood.
Nice. That's so
Look at
awesome.
that. Yeah, look at that.
My wife grew up in Union.
We were neighbors. We were neighbors right there.
Without knowing it.
There you go. Look at that. So yes. And being in South Carolina, you don't quite get the seasons the way you do, but there's some
Yeah.
advantages to not having those brutal winters too, I'm sure.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I do. I miss the beauty of fall coming, because you can see it, I think, more distinctly in the north. Like it just the trees, the leaves changing and everything. There's something just absolutely gorgeous about watching that happen. You miss that down here, but again, it's a trade-off.
For sure.
So I'm a little bit of a personality type junkie, and one of the first things that caught my eye as I was reading, you probably guessed it, is your personality types. You happen to mention them, and you're an Enneagram 8
Mm-hmm.
and an ENTJ. Now, I'm a Enneagram 1 and INFJ.
Okay.
So when it comes to organization and decluttering and all, I live in that world. I can't function in chaos. But I wanted to ask you first, is it important to you to know this information, to know about your personality type?
I would say it's helpful.
Okay.
It's something that you theoretically you could go through life never knowing your Enneagram type, never knowing your Myers-Briggs type, and live a really meaningful, happy, fulfilled life.
Yeah.
So I don't want to say that this is a must-have. I will say that having this knowledge and knowing how to apply it, like knowing what it is great, but then knowing what to do with it or how you can use that in different aspects of your life, whether it's relationally, whether
Yeah.
that's parenting, at work, whatever that is, just to have a level of clarity about your own strengths and weaknesses and areas that you might want to work on, I think is just beneficial for
Yeah.
all of us as humans. And in my space, particularly when it comes to organization and clutter and all of that stuff, I think having that insight is very helpful because it gives me an indication of where you are intuitively stronger and where you're weaker. And then
Yeah.
again, we're doing broad stroke generalizations, but it gives me some sort of direction of saying this might be where you might struggle or have you ever? And so it gives me a launch pad to have those conversations.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of power in self-awareness.
100%. Yeah,
Right. So if you don't mind diving a little bit deeper into that,
for
in
sure.
what ways have you noticed that having this knowledge of, your personality type, your strengths, your weaknesses, what fills you, what drains you, things like that, in what ways do you notice that impacting your day-to-day life, or even more specifically, even your work life?
So
Do
you're
you
saying
notice
with
an impact?
myself, you're
Yeah,
saying
yeah, yeah.
in myself. Um, well, specifically with the Enneagram, because that was really more transformational for me in terms of my work than Myers-Briggs. Um, I,
How
I,
so? I know I'm derailing us a
yeah,
little bit
no,
here,
no,
but
no, it's fine.
how so?
So, and again, this is nothing against any of the personality typologies for people that are listening out there, whether it's disc strength finders, Myers Briggs, whatever it is,
Yeah.
the four tendencies. I'm a big Gretchen Rubin fan. All these things, I think it's really insightful. When I learned my Myers Briggs type, maybe it was just contextually because I was young. I was in my early 20s and it was in my first like professional job. And I went to a conference and it was like, okay, we did this assessment, but I didn't really know how to apply it. Like I didn't know what to do with it. It was more just like, okay, here's
Yeah.
where you're strong and this is something to know about yourself. So it was more of like a conversation starter.
Yeah.
For me, when I learned about the Enneagram, and basically, just in case any of your listeners out there are not familiar with the Enneagram, just real top line, Enneagram is a personality typology with 9 core distinct types. And what differentiates the Enneagram from other personality typologies is that it looks at your core motivation
Yeah.
versus behavior. So behavior is the result, but your Enneagram type is determined by the why behind it, what motivates you to do that action.
Yeah.
And so what drew me to that is the work that I had been doing up until that point for like a decade plus, looking at different types of clutter was all gearing about motivation, like clutter being the symptom of something bigger, like the pile of paper isn't the problem. It's what's leading up to that type of thing. So when I started researching the Enneagram, I found it very fascinating. What I loved about it is a couple things. First of all, I found it's very fluid. So we're not linear people and there are situations, stages in our lives, other things that cause us times of stress and periods where we're feeling really thriving, that plays into how we show up in the world. And so I like that the Enneagram gave you that kind of leeway to look at not just we're putting you in this box kind of thing, and this is how you are. What I also liked about it is it allowed me that so that piece of it. And again, maybe I just didn't dive deep enough back in the day. And I'm sure there's tons and tons of ways that people can apply other personality typologies. So I don't want to, talk negatively about any of the other ones. But for me, I found it very easy to find resources of how can I use this information to be a better version of myself. Coincidentally, the one area that sorry, if you're on video, you see me playing with my hair. I have like a weird thing going on. I couldn't find connection points relating in the field of study that I do, which is studying organization and clutter. Yeah. So when I started learning about the Enneagram, I started to kind of went down this rabbit hole and was actively seeking out, well, what about the link between Enneagram and clutter or Enneagram and organization? And it just wasn't out there. I just couldn't find it. And I talked to some of the top leading experts like Suzanne Stabile and Ian Cron, who wrote the Road Back to You, and a lot of other really trailblazers in this area. Yeah. And I said, where can I go to find information about Enneagram type and clutter? And they're like, we don't have it. There's Enneagram and parenting, Enneagram and marriage, all of these other. And I was like, okay, well, and it's like most things. Okay, if something's out there, then you have to go and create it. So that's what I did.
I love it. I love it. And so I do want, I love that you shared that. Thank you. And I do want us to jump back now to the original question. Now, in what ways have you seen having this awareness of your personality?
I'm sorry, totally forgot to answer the question. I got so sidetracked. So
that's all right.
So in my own life, this awareness has helped me be a better spouse. I mean, from a personal perspective, understanding my Enneagram type and knowing the characteristics, the good and the bad, have been really, really helpful. That's the other thing about the Enneagram is it doesn't just highlight all your strengths. It also looks at the areas that you need to work on.
Yeah.
And so that was really transformational for me. It was also really helpful for me to understand my spouse and my kids and as a business owner, the people who are on my team, understanding where they are, because we all see the world through different lenses. And so it provided a level of context for me of why somebody might be doing something that they're doing, or why they would do it differently than I would, or approach a task differently than I would. So I would say from that perspective, it was really eye-opening.
Yeah.
In my work, obviously, it played in because it allowed me to have language to address all of the things relating to clutter and organization that I've been writing, speaking, and working one-on-one with clients, consulting for a past decade. It added another layer for me to go deeper and just address, articulate things in a way that I wasn't able to articulate them before. Does that answer the question now?
That answers the question perfectly, I think.
Okay.
No, I think that's spot on. That is super spot on. And I think that's a perfect setup for diving more specifically now into what it is that you do, because we've alluded to it a little bit and pretty directly, I think. But just to set up, if you're listening, Laurie is the founder of Simply Be Organized. Very impressive. So the website is linked in the episode description, but you guys got to check this out. She's the founder of Simply Be Organized. You write and teach on the topic as well of organization and decluttering, including on your popular podcast, The Organized Life. right? That's correct.
This organized life.
This organized.
That's
I
okay.
thought that I
That's okay.
So this organized life, and then of course you work with people on helping them to wrap their head around this, how to
For sure.
declutter and get organized. And I wanted to ask you, how did this all start? Where did this begin for you? And did you just wake up one day and say, I think I'm going to launch a business, and this is the topic?
Yeah, I love this question because my origin story is very underwhelming, to be completely honest. Um, it actually was not a big epiphany. As a matter of fact, I like to tell the story, and I'm much older than you, so this may even. But back in the day, when Oprah was in her heyday, I remember being a teenager. And I used to watch her every day when I came home from school. And
Yeah.
she would talk about following your passion and doing things with passion. And I remember going, I don't have a passion. Like, I don't know what she's talking about. Now, granted, I was like in high school, which again, not everybody now as a mom with, teens, I
Yeah.
see, obviously that's a kind of a crazy concept for a lot of people. But even when I went off into college, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I was one of those people that was like, okay, I know what I'm good at. I know I'm good at writing. I know I'm really comfortable speaking in front of people. So I was a communications major in college, but not
Yeah.
because I really had any specific trajectory that I saw myself. And wound up, basically, long story short, after several jobs, ended up being an executive recruiter. I kind of fell into that world by just happenstance and did really well. And I found that I really enjoyed, if I were to like look back and dissect, I really enjoyed working with people and finding out what motivated them. And like fast forward, I had no idea anything about the Enneagram at the time or anything like that. But I was always interested in trying to connect the dots and help people to do things that mattered. I always felt time was really a big, and now I articulate it more. So it's more of an outward like value that I preach upon almost.
Yeah.
But it was something that it was just there, but I didn't necessarily articulate it as clearly as I do now. But I always was like, we spend so much time at work. We spend so much time doing these things. Like we should really value our time. And that's, what was so important to me. And so for 15 years, that's what I did. And during that time, I got married and had a couple kids and was a working mom, stay-at-home mom, all the things.
Yeah.
And because of that, and I was wearing all of the hats like so many people do.
Yeah.
I created systems and strategies in my own life so that I could value my own time and I could volunteer at church when I wanted to. And someone's like, oh, can you help us run vacation Bible school? Sure, I can do that. And not that I don't struggle with calendar clutter and getting overscheduled and all the things, but I was really intentional. And that was the thing with how I spent my time. And it was something that I was just how I kind of lived my life. And I would see as my girls were getting older and we were going on play dates and doing things like that, that just the people in my real life, and these are the days way before social media, were stressed and struggling with things that came pretty naturally to me.
Yeah.
Like whether it was basic things like meal planning or scheduling laundry or just however I was structuring my day just came pretty intuitively to me. And so fast forward, I had a friend of mine when my kids were in like 7 and 9, and she was an interior designer or is an interior designer. And she said, hey, would you ever do any like consulting? Because I have a couple clients that, are hiring me to design, their homes and spend all this money on furniture and built-ins and all this fancy stuff. She goes, but their houses are filled with clutter. And you have helped so many of us as friends, just going over people's houses, offering tips and strategies.
Yeah.
Would you ever do? And I was like, yeah, I'll come help you, like just as a favor. And I did it a couple times and
I love
realized that I was kind of onto something. And so that was really the birth of my business. And it's sort of just kind of evolved from there.
That's amazing. And I find it interesting the perspective you take on your origin story, because I think that it sounds in a weird way. I don't know if everyone will understand when I say it this way, but it sounds like the stuff movies are made of. Like there's a natural progression to it of almost self-discovery, like discovering your purpose along the way. Like one of the things you mentioned is, as you were going into college, you knew what you were good at, but you didn't necessarily have this clear sense of, this is what I want to be when I grow up. And one, I think
Totally.
that's really freeing for a lot of people to hear, even now. As someone may be listening and going, well, I didn't know that's okay. I didn't know it's okay to not have it figured out, and to just kind of maybe, lean into my strengths. And I guess this is where the importance of knowing your strengths come in. But I think that's such a beautiful progression of, for me, it sounds like self-discovery, or discovery of purpose.
Yeah, totally. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And yeah, and as it's something that I try to instill in my girls, because now I've got two in college.
Yeah.
And it is, depending on, your people that are listening out there, whether you're somebody who is in that boat yourself, or maybe you're a parent and you have kids that are kind of coming up the ranks. My husband and I both were really intentional about trying to tell our kids, like, you don't have to know. Like, there is this, like, I remember going to orientation just a couple years ago with both my girls.
Yeah.
And like, they want you to declare a major right away, and you have to know. And like, it is so much stress.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you don't have to know. Like, there are certain things that are just, if there's something that that you're good at, lean into it. My husband and I, again, this isn't about this, and I'm kind of going on a tangent, but like, my husband's a digital media guy.
Yeah.
It didn't even exist when he was in college, right? He was a history major at UNC. Like,
Exactly.
because he was interested in that. So you don't, it doesn't have to necessarily have, our lives aren't linear.
Yeah.
We have all of these things. It just so happens that it works out that if you look at my major, I really do a lot of what my major was. But again, it wasn't set out to do that. As much as I am a scheduled person and I like lists and I like planning, it was just a series of events. And I think that's,
Yeah.
I think that that's important. I think there's you have to balance, and you obviously talk all about this,
Yeah.
a level of intentionality with the things that you do, the choices you make, the people you align with, how you spend your time, whatever you're doing, with just kind of not forcing things before their time, which is tricky.
And I think a part of why it's lined up so perfectly, and this may be my perspective. Uh, we may listen to this later on and go, Paul is way off, but this may just be me. I think a part of why it lines up so perfectly, especially with your major and what you do now, is because you were honoring what was true about you, what your personality type was, what your strength was. Maybe let's take personality type out of it. But what your strengths were. You were being honest with, okay, you know what? I think this is what I enjoy. This is what I think I'm good at. I'm going to spend time leaning into this. And I think that honoring your personal wiring is just kind of been paying off, it seems. And I wanted to ask you, if you wouldn't mind taking a stab at it. Back when you were just kind of doing this, it was coming naturally to you, as you put it. If you were to maybe take a snapshot of one of those moments and dive into your mind a little bit, what do you think was maybe the motivation for you in being organized, when there wasn't this necessary external pressure, particularly to force you to say, oh man, Laurie, you got to get it together, you got to get organized, or X, Y, and Z won't happen. What was happening internally, or psychologically, you think, that may have pushed you in that direction?
Yeah. So that's a great question, and hopefully I can answer it properly. I always believed that your home, wherever it is, I don't care if it's big, small, studio apartment, whatever it looks like, should be a place of calm and retreat. Now, we don't live in fairy tales. Okay.
Yeah.
I lived in a chaotic house. There's arguing, there's kids, there's dogs, there's the whole nine. But at the end of the day, there's so many external pressures in life. And this is, again, this is going back to like before social media. This is going back to before our lives were 24/7
Yeah.
and we couldn't, or it was, you had to be really intentional about shutting it off. Okay. And even then it was, you're stressed at work. You had a crappy commute or what, whatever the situation was, there
Yeah.
were all of these external things that could put a roadblock in your day and in your mood potentially. Even if you're a glass half full person, there are things that are going to come up and you're going to get the flat tire and your boss is going to be whatever, the client's not going to show up, all of these things that are going to add stress to your day.
Yeah.
And I always wanted to be able to come home and exhale.
Yeah.
That was important to me.
Yeah.
And for me, being surrounded by physical clutter was adding to that stress. And so, and fortunately, my husband as well, which we didn't even like, we kind of knew we had similar like patterns of behavior, but we both didn't like it. So that it was really important knowing that I didn't want to come home every day after a long day at work, even before I had kids, and have to deal with this sink full of dishes or I have all this laundry or just the boring, mundane, day-to-day household stuff that we all have to deal with. I was like, how can I streamline this? How can I like streamline my workflow? And so that if I'm putting in a little extra time on the back end, I can come home and exhale. And so knowing that why gave me the, okay, so I'm going to put away the dishes or open the mail or whatever the fill in the blank is so that I could.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the catalyst, I think, for me. And then I enjoyed then the physical organization piece of it. So it was more stemming from like, how can I simplify my life? Doesn't mean I'm being a minimalist. It means how can I simplify my life in the things that I do? And then the reward for me was, okay, well, what kind of like fun products can I use to make enjoyable, And so while I'm doing this, how can I make this be, incorporated into my way of life?
Yeah. 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 You were, it sounds like injecting some efficiency in life. But I think you mentioned something that, you know, I think is very interesting. And I don't think a lot of people think about it this way. And you've said it a
Mhm.
few times. So I'd love it if you elaborate a little bit on it. Because when most people think about the idea of decluttering and getting organized, they start with, buying the bins and the, drawer organizers and all the storage containers and start packing up. But it sounds like that may not be the starting point, actually. That may be just a part of the process, but there might be some work necessary before getting there. Would you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad that you brought that up because that's a really big part of kind of my process and how I approach things. So I like to make this analogy. I don't know if any of you, I don't know if you're a runner or if there's anybody that's out there that's a runner. I am not a runner. I used to be a runner. I'm not a runner anymore. But if you're somebody who has never run before, but you want to, you're like aspiring to run and you want to run. The first thing that a lot of times people will be like, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to research and I'm going to buy the best, most expensive running sneakers on the market. Right. And you can apply this to fill in the blank, whatever. It could be anything, but this was my, I'm going to go out there and you could spend a fortune on these really like high end things, but you're going to start small, right? Because you've never run. You're just going to start. And a lot of times people think that the shoe in this case is going to make them a better runner. Now, arguably, this shoe is probably going to make it more enjoyable. And yes, maybe it's going to be a little bit easier in some ways, but you still have to put in the work. You have to get up every day. You got to put those shoes on. You have to have the discipline to go, it's 5:30 in the morning and I don't want to run, or I just had a long day at work and I don't want to, you have to get up and actually do the work. And whether you're wearing some sneakers off the clearance aisle at whatever at Target, or you bought the most expensive sneakers, you are still the one that you're what matters. And it's just a matter of, these are the icing on the cake.
Yeah.
And so it's not about the shoe. And so when I talk about organizing, 100%, there are certain products that are going to help provide the solution and make it better. But that's not the catalyst for success, isn't the product. It's you, and it's the habits and the behavior that you're doing. And the behavior and the habits are stemming from either your motivation. And I'm not talking about like willpower, like I'm going to white knuckle this, because that doesn't have to work. You have to have that buy into it.
Yeah.
But willing to say, okay, I'm going to get and put it to do the work. And especially if you're somebody that is dealing with clutter, you don't even know what products you're going to need, because you don't know what your actual volume is, because there's so many other distractions that are clouding it. So a lot of times people will come in and say, and I could walk into a space and say, I think you probably should go vertical and we could do some shelving on a wall and whatever, but I don't know and I know what my favorite go-to bins are and things like that. But at the end of the day, I don't know how many I'm going to need. I don't know what we're going to use. I don't know what's going in them. Yeah. We have to do that deep dive first. And then the fun part comes later, which is, how can we make it look fun and pretty and accessible for whatever it is that we need?
So as I'm listening to you, it makes perfect sense. I think the picture you use is just perfect. It's not about the shoe, it's about the person. Because the shoe doesn't create the runner. The runner runs even if they're barefoot, right?
Yeah. And what happens to a lot of people is they don't have the right system and strategy, right? So they don't have, we'll go back to our running analogy.
Yeah.
They don't have a training plan. They don't know, so they don't have the good habits and discipline to do things or continue to do things. And I'm not shaming them discipline because they don't know. Most people struggle with discipline because they don't have a plan that's works for them, right? Yeah. Like I know that if I, probably cut out carbs and reduce my calories, I'll probably lose some weight. But like, what's motivating me every day to go, I really shouldn't have that bagel. Yeah. What is that? And so it's the same type of a thing with your clutter, is knowing what's prompting me to want to buy this. Am I bored? Am I buying it? Like, why do I have so much stuff? Or why can't I not, why do I keep bringing stuff into my house that I really don't need? Or on the flip side, why do I struggle with getting rid of things that I'm holding on to that I'm not using? I don't have any real emotional attachment to, but yet I still feel compelled to hold on to it.
Yeah.
I don't care what bin you're going to get. If you have too much stuff, you're just going to have organized clutter. And I tell that to people all the time,
That's good. That's so good. I'm sorry for interrupting.
That's fine.
To echo a little bit, organized clutter, because most people, I think, for me, and I don't think I've ever looked at it this way, but when you think about decluttering, or you think about specifically organizing, you think if I'm organized, I'm not cluttered, or, I've gotten rid of the clutter, but it's possible to just organize the clutter.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, again, as I gotten older in my own life, and I'm, I joke, I'm like, I'm on the back nine, but, the first half of your life and you're accumulating things. And for me, I had kids, and kids come with stuff, and, they had activities, and that had stuff and all of the things. And now that they're kind of growing and moving out, and there's like less obligations of me on time, as well as the physical stuff, I don't have the inclination, the need, the desire to accumulate as much, because for me, it's just more work. Then it's more, I got to find a home for it, and I got to clean it, and I got to this, that, I don't want that. I want simple. And so for me, that means, I don't want to have to struggle with, all the things that come the responsibility that comes with stuff. And so a lot of times we don't think about it. We think as humans, again, present company included, we work a lot on impulse control. Right now, I'm in the moment. I'm bored. I'm happy. I'm sad. I'm this. I'm going to buy something, whatever it is.
So
go
let
ahead.
me ask you this.
Yeah.
I as I'm listening, I'm thinking, okay, well, it sounds like a big part of the process, when you start to work with someone is, at somewhere in the beginning, there's the work of assessing the motivation. You mentioned that a few times. Is that what does that process look? Is that the complete process before starting the actual physical decluttering or organizing, or is there more that goes into it? How do you help someone assess their motivation?
That's a great question. So way before motivation was a common articulated theme the way it is now, I just started studying patterns of behavior for people. And after just going into hundreds and hundreds of homes and working with different people, I started to identify 3 different main types of clutter. And so this is where I start primarily, is in a conversation. If you're listening out there, you don't need to hire a professional organizer. If you want, that's great. There's tons of them out there. We've got a whole resource list of people all over the place, but you can just do this yourself if you want. We have a free kind of clutter quiz on our website that you can check out.
Yeah.
And I look at clutter into 3 specific areas. The first one's physical clutter, which is obvious. That's the stuff that you see.
Yeah.
And then we have, emotional clutter. So physical clutter is toys, clothes, whatever it is, dishes in the sink, all of that stuff. Emotional clutter is that guilt and fear that holds us back from getting rid of the physical stuff that we have. And then we have calendar clutter, which is that overscheduled, that time management, that time piece about not being able to do the things that we want to do, prioritize a thing because we're either overscheduled, over busy, or not using our time wisely.
Yeah.
And so I encourage people to just identify which of those 3 do they feel is most dominant for them. And when I talk about them, I talk about if you were to have like a model, they'd be like interlocking concentric circles because they're not, again, linear. One feeds into another. But for most people, when I even just have this brief little snippet conversation, most people can say, oh yeah, I tend to struggle with calendar clutter, or I'm big with emotional clutter, or I'm a shopper and I have physical clutter. And so I encourage people to first say, okay, this is where I think my pitfall is, right? So you don't need any Enneagram. I love using that. Again, the work that I do just ties into like, okay, if you know your Enneagram type, where do you struggle with those 3? And we kind of go deeper down a rabbit hole. Yeah. But if you're like listening out here and you're like, I don't even know that. I just know that I'm frustrated. I don't like my stuff. Nothing I'm doing is working. First, I would encourage you to say, where do I feel like my biggest pitfall is? Is it one of those 3? And once you can understand that, then you can start to say, okay, then I talk about strategies for each one of them, because we know, like with anything, there's not a one size fits all approach. And so the physical clutter, for certain people, you're going to address it one way. For emotional clutter, for certain people, you're going to address it a different way. Your strategy is going to vary based on kind of where you are. And this is where the beauty of knowing the Enneagram and knowing your motivation comes into play.
Yeah.
Because the strategy that I use for my daughter, who's an Enneagram 4, who struggles with emotional clutter, might be very different than the strategy that I'm using with you as an Enneagram 1 that might struggle with clutter, with certain types of clutter. Everyone, no one is immune to struggling with clutter. To me, I define clutter as things that are anything that's unnecessary, not serving you in your life. It's not just about bringing joy, and that's no shame to anybody out there. That I think that's great. But there's plenty of things in our lives. My mail has never brought me joy. Well, maybe if someone was sending me like a birthday card with a check in it or something and Christmas cards, but do you know what I mean? And I always say like my kid's lacrosse stick did not bring me joy, but I still had to find a home for it. There are things that we have in our lives that we are important and are serving a purpose for us. And we need to still address that. And so we have to kind of understand a little bit about what's holding us back from the progress that we want to make. And that's where my motivation, Enneagram knowledge comes into bringing that language into the conversation.
Yeah. I think you just changed some lives just with that bit of insight right there. Just again, you're dropping so many gems right now. I love it. I absolutely love it.
Oh, thanks, Paul.
Three types of clutter. And as I'm processing, like for me, I can't function in physical clutter, so I generally keep my spaces pretty clear. And as far as calendar clutter, I'm deeply introverted, so I'm not necessarily jumping at the bit. Emotional clutter, however, that's something that I'm like, man, I think that might be my pitfall. I think that might be where I need to do some decluttering right now, as I'm processing. And I wanted to ask you about the reverse of this, right? Because we just talked about these, uh, they're not linear, but like for example, emotional clutter and starting there and kind of leading into the physical clutter or decluttering. I wanted to ask you about your opinion on if you've ever seen any relationship or direct correlation between living in a space of physical clutter and its impact on our mental and emotional health.
Oh, 100%. Absolutely.
Talk about it.
When I walk into somebody's, and I say this all the time, I say it in jest, but I also mean it 100%. Like this is a no judgment zone. Like even you and I were joking before you hit record and you were like, I started organizing my, my office. And I observe things, but I don't judge. And I really want to make that clear distinction. So I could walk in one of my dearest friends, love her to death. She's my neighbor. We've been friends for 20 years. She's a hot mess when it comes to her house. It's always in disarray. And we've had this conversation and I've helped her with strategies and trying to set things up. But there's a level of chaos in her life. She's wonderful, but she's got an over bustling life of stuff, work, responsibilities. And so this chaos that I see, that I observe when I walk in her house is ultimately a reflection of what her life is, what's going on in her life. Now, I also want to make a clear distinction that I look at I look at clutter also with two very clear lenses. One of them being what I call situational clutter, and one of them being what I call chronic clutter.
Yeah.
And just to kind of give a brief definition, I define situational clutter in when you have exactly a situation, a reason why, a short-term situation, why you have a mess or things are out of place.
Yeah.
For example, you could be, it's Christmas, so I have all this like incoming packages. So I've got like everything shoved in the guest room right now. Yeah. Or it could be, again, we're having a party. We're accumulating all of this stuff because we're having this. It could also be something that's not good. Like we're dealing with something that has to rank on the priority list right now. Maybe somebody's ill or our attention needs to be somewhere. So maybe things aren't as tightly buttoned up as we want them to be. And so as a result of it, we've got a couple piles of paper, maybe not all the laundry's put away, things like that. Yeah. We call that situational clutter. The difference is with situational clutter, things have a home, you have a system and strategy, but because of something that's going on in the short term, things are just not perfect because we don't live in a Pinterest picture. Now, chronic clutter is different. And this is really where it's more of the issue. Chronic clutter is ongoing. It's something that's there, and it's there because you either don't have the learned skill yet, because organization is a learned skill.
Yeah.
It's some people, I joke that I was born with the organizing gene, and there's a lot of people that it does come intuitively, but there's a lot of people that were not, but they can be taught these skills. So that's the good news. If you're like, I was never organized growing up and I didn't grow up in an organized home. Okay, granted, you may have to put a little bit more muscle into it, but you totally can do it.
Yeah.
But so chronic clutter is results from either not having that system or just something else going on that's taking over. And so that's really where, when people tend to call me in, it's when they are struggling with chronic clutter. And that is a symptom of something bigger that's going on. And so when I go into somebody's home, back to your original question, and I see patterns, one of the first things I do, I don't see a ton of clients one-on-one anymore, but when I used to all the time, the first thing I did is what I call an organizing diagnostic. And I would say, even if they called me and said, can you come look at my garage? I would say, absolutely. But we're going to do, during our consult, we're going to do a walkthrough of your whole house.
Yeah.
Kind of like a physical, because I don't want to just treat the headache, right? I don't want to just treat the garage. I want to see, is this an isolated thing for the garage where everything else? I want to see how you live. I want to see the other areas of your life. Is this a pattern of something else? Or is this something that is truly, just, this one limited, area? And more often than not, there are patterns of behavior in other areas of people's homes, and in their lives. And when you start to unpack and go through the deeper questions of, well, tell me about your life. Tell me about what your day is like. Tell me about what's the division of labor in your house? What was your life like growing up? All of these things play into how clutter shows up in our lives. And so it's important for me to come in there and not just prescribe a solution without really kind of getting to the root of the problem in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, for anyone listening, like another way, as you're saying that, another way I'm thinking about it is like clutter is symptomatic.
Mm-hmm.
And you're looking to treat the root cause, like you said.
It's exactly what I say all the time. I say it. I have quotes all the time. I say, clutter is just the symptom. It's not the root. And my job, if I'm doing my job well, my goal is to challenge you, inspire you, whether I'm working with you one-on-one, whether you're listening to this podcast or my podcast or reading a book or whatever. My responsibility, my promise is that I want to try to help you to understand where that comes from, because otherwise, you just keep drinking from a fire hose. It's like someone who just goes to the doctor or they just keep taking Tylenol every time they get a headache. Yeah. Well, you might need glasses, and maybe the headaches will stop when you get to the root of the problem. And so if we can figure out where that's coming from, then it's easier to change the behavior.
If you struggle to reach the goals you set for yourself, the good news is it's most likely not because you're lazy or that you lack discipline. Statistically speaking, you're most likely struggling to reach your goals because your life is out of balance. In 2017, the Harvard Business Review reported that the United States spends more than $190 billion with a B, billion dollars to address the physical and psychological effects of burnout in the average working professional. And these numbers are from before the pandemic, so who knows what it is now? The point is, anyone trying to reach a goal while navigating burnout, whether consciously or subconsciously, is not set up to succeed. This was my experience until I discovered the life balance approach to reaching your goals and changing your life. This approach to reaching your goals takes into account your life balance as you work towards your goals. Subsequently, it basically guarantees success for almost any goal you're trying to reach. And I know that is a big promise, but it is very much realistic and very much possible. In my best-selling book, Life Balance, I outlined the principles of this formula. And due to popular demand, the online course for the book is now available. In this course, I walk you through each and every principle individually and how to apply it to your life. It's a self-paced course, so you can take it on your own time and go through it as quickly or as slowly as you would like. Every purchase includes a digital copy of my book, Life Balance, the Life Balance workbook in PDF format, and the Life Balance planner, also in PDF format. For a limited time, you can purchase this course at 50% off when you use promo code PODCAST. To purchase this course today, visit paulwcroswell.com. Now let's get back to the episode.
And the other thing is, I see so much shame from people. They treat clutter like it's their dirty little secret. And, it doesn't help with social media and everything that we curated things that we see around us, that people just tend to feel like they're not measuring up. And so I don't want, going back to my original thing, is I wanted not just my home to be a place of calm and that I was happy and a sense of pride that I wanted to be in, but I want other people to feel that way too about their spaces.
Yeah.
I remember when my kids were little, people like, I'm all about hospitality. Come over. There's always a seat at my table for you. Like, come over. It's fine. And I had so many friends especially like when the kids were little and you have to go play dates and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Where they wouldn't want to have me in their house. And I wasn't even doing this for a living. Like, it wasn't even something because they were embarrassed about their house. And I'm like, I don't want anybody to ever feel that way about their space, because our spaces are to some extent an extension of us or a reflection of us. And I don't want to over-import making like our material surroundings more important than they really are.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a connection, and I don't want people to feel, if they're shameful about their space, how that translates to how they feel about themselves.
Yeah. Because it is a direct correlation there. And I think that brings up another really good point that you touched on earlier as you were speaking. Because of the society we live in now, with social media being as prevalent as it is, and we get these really curated feeds of other people's lives. We all like to call it the highlight reel of everyone else's life, where you don't necessarily get to see even the situational clutter sometimes they're dealing with, much less the chronic clutter, right? To use that language, which now I'm going to adopt into my vocabulary. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Take it away. It's all up for grabs.
There's this increased pressure, I think, to treat the symptom in order to just get a quick result. And I'm trying to process, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this if you have any. Process, what the potential long-term or mental and emotional impact is of only ever treating the symptom over and over and over again. What does that do to someone's self-esteem, someone's their sense of self, or the potential or possibility or strength they have to actually change their lives, because they've only ever treated the symptoms because the pressure is so high to live up to the standard. They never actually spend the time to figure out, what I think there's emotional clutter that I need to work on, or, calendar clutter. They have no idea about these things because they've never actually given themselves the time or the freedom to,
Yeah. I mean, it's a great question. And it's such an ongoing thing. And I think anybody that's out there that has a platform, I don't care how large or small your platform is, has an opportunity to show up and be authentic. And that's something that I pride myself on doing. And I do it in my personal life. I do it in, my public life, whatever.
And you do a very good job of it, at least, from what I've seen on Instagram particularly.
Yeah. And people will be like, why don't you post a beautiful before and after? So I was like, because I don't have beautiful before. Like, sometimes occasionally I do, but like, that's not really what my life is like. But the other thing is, I think, to answer your question, where's the finish line? That's the thing. Like, what are we chasing?
Yeah.
When we think things are going to solve our problem, when we think a thing, whatever that is going to solve a problem. Whether that is, I don't feel good about myself, so I'm going to spend a lot of money and buy this fill in the blank, shoes, purse, whatever. And then you get it and you have that quick dopamine hit. And then afterwards you're like, okay, I still am looking at the same person in the mirror, and it's not. I think we have this, we all have this kind of like distorted image, and this is present company included, where I look at things and we want things to be a quick fix. We want something to solve our problem. And we want to find that because we're all grasping for that, right? Like life is hard and there's a lot on us, and decision fatigue is real. Like trying to figure out, like, am I making the right decision? What to do? And there's so much out there. I mean, whether it's what podcast do I listen to? What church do I go to? What store do I shop at? Whatever, what restaurant, all these things, like we want somebody to pave a way. And if there's somebody that we maybe look up to or that we see or that we follow on social media, and we deem this person as worthy for whatever that reason is, whether it's we like them, they have a certain number of followers or whatever that is, we think if we do this or we follow what worked for them, that is going to work for us. And I find that often leaves us even more defeated than when we started. And so the solution, and this is something like as a mom, I would always be like, listen, don't ever complain unless you can have a solution. Like if you can offer up a solution. And so for me, I've noticed for myself, I just choose, I'm very specific over where I choose to spend my attention in this world of 24/7, right? We can't control what's necessarily being put out there, but we can choose what we're allowing to come in to our phones or in our feeds, or where we're intentionally going or not going. And if we are starting to feel like we are constantly, one of my favorite quotes is, comparison is the thief of joy. And I have been guilty myself of looking at somebody else out there and going, oh my gosh, she has it all. Like her podcast is further than mine, or she's got this. And I just will stop myself. And I'm like, this is not healthy. And this is a me problem. And I'm going to either unfollow or unsubscribe, or if I can't look at this from an objective standpoint and all I'm doing is comparing what I'm doing. And listen, I love social media for inspiration. I probably follow 1,000 like decor and vacation spots, and I love to dream and inspire and like also funny and entertaining things. And I feel like that's what we can use the power of technology for information, for education, for a distraction, but all of it's done in a healthy way. And when we're using that as a solution to our own problem, that's where it's a slippery slope, because like you said, we're only seeing this very, very curated sliver of what the reality of it is without knowing any of the other backstory.
It's a really weird place to be, I think, in human history. Not weird, but maybe interesting, because I think we're still we're still so new to it, in the grand scheme of things, that I don't know that anyone really has a good idea of its potential long-term impact, the kind of changes and the kind of access we now have to other people's lives, or at least parts of it. But I think that is a really healthy way to go about it that you just outlined. It's a very healthy way to navigate it.
And I think, thank you. And I think on the flip side, like the good thing is there's people like you and me who have the opportunity to be able to come in and bring value into people's lives through podcasting and other things that maybe before it was only limited to, celebrity status or people that were in a specific profession or did a certain thing. And so there is so much good to be found, but we just have to weed out and realizing, what choices am I making? I have a choice to be intentional every day. And I know, again, you talk about balance and,
Yeah.
all of the things in life. And, how am I using my time and my energy and the resources given to me in this day, whatever day this is, to enhance my life as opposed to take away from it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that that's the key right there. It's really kind of taking back your power, realizing you have the choice as the individual. You get to choose what your feed looks like. And that's a part of why I think so many people were pushing back on Instagram's changes,
Mhm.
because they were beginning to choose your feed for you to an extent, through how they were, setting everything up. And so many people, it was too much too soon. I think for a lot of folks,
Mhm.
including myself, I was just kind of like, this is. I don't think this is for me much longer. However, that's not our conversation. Um, I do think though that that is the key. The key is realizing you are in charge of what you let in through that feed. And when you realize that and you figure out, I get to curate this, I get to shape this, I get to follow and unfollow. And something you said was so very important. Where if you realize, someone you're following, or whether it's a page or a company or person or whatever, uh, it's beginning to impact your mental health, even if it's something like comparison. You get to choose, if you're self-aware enough, choose to say, you know what, I think I need to take a break from engaging with this person or following this person, because I can't engage with them and just appreciate what it is they're offering and benefit from it in this season of my life. For whatever reason, I need to do some work with me and then re-engage when I feel I'm healthy enough to do that. That there's so much health in that. And so I want to keep us moving here, because I think there's a lot to still unpack. uh I was gonna ask a question. I'm gonna ask a different one. I was filtering on the spot there.
It's
I
okay.
wanted to ask you, because you mentioned this before. What's your advice for someone with young kids, toddlers even, who, maybe they're listening and they're going, I don't even think decluttering is an option for me. I don't think it's possible. What's your thought for those folks?
Well, I'm going to challenge them that it is, right? And I'm not saying I don't live by a prescriptive rule of you should have, people will ask me, questions of how many stuffed animals should my kid have or how many shirts should they have? Like I don't live by those prescriptive rationales.
Yeah.
But I will say that it's there are reasons that people feel overwhelmed and lack of strategy for anything makes things seem impossible. It seems
Mm,
that mountain really impossible to climb. And with the risk of sounding cliche, I mean, I break things down super simply in terms of a tactical perspective. I think first you have to believe and have the buy-in. That's the first thing, right?
yeah.
You have to believe that it's possible. And again, setting that realistic bar, right? Maybe your house is never going to be like every counter is, and maybe it will, but in the near future, if you've got stuff everywhere, chances are that you're not going to have anything out of place in by next week. Yeah, that's probably not going to happen. But I
Yeah.
think reestablishing a healthy set of expectations and little incremental goals that you're going to be reaching. Again, going back to my running analogy, if you're somebody who's never exercised before, if you're going to get up and say, I'm going to run a marathon, of course it's possible, but you're not going to run it next week. You're going to have to start to do a couch to 5K and then maybe run a 10K and then maybe a half marathon. And you're going to start to build on this slowly. And maybe you just start by walking around the block. Maybe that's where you start.
Yeah.
So for somebody that's out there that just feels like they are drowning in clutter and maybe their life right now is in a season where they have a lot of stuff. They've got a lot of kids who have a lot of stuff that come with it. I get it. Um, but there is always something that can be done.
Yeah.
And so be open to making a small step because it's all of these series of repeated small steps is when you start to see the progress.
Yeah. Yeah. And coaching, we would call that agency related hope thoughts.
Oh,
The just the belief that you can actually accomplish something. And we actually say that this is so important for actually being able to reach a goal, just having that belief. And I love that you outlined something that they can do to begin to develop that belief in themselves. Setting realistic expectations. And for if you're listening, maybe a part of that is just who it is that you're looking at. Who is it that you're looking at, that you're kind of gauging and saying, I want my house to look like theirs. Like if you're watching TV and you're going, I want my house to look like Joanna Gaines's house. From what it is now, like you said, that's probably not gonna happen, at least not right away.
right. Exactly. And again, and it's always, again, not to sound like you don't want to compare your today to somebody else's, what they've been doing for the past however many years.
Yeah.
Um, we have a tendency to do that. Again, that's human nature, I think, because I do it too. I'll look at somebody and be like, oh my God, she's so fit. Like, look at her arms, they're so jacked. Well, for all I know, she trains 4 hours a day and hasn't eaten a French fry, you know? And so, like, there's a trade-off, or maybe she was just genetically born like that. Who knows what the reason is? But I'm seeing this one thing and going, oh, I'll never have that.
Yeah.
Or why won't I have that? But maybe there is a way that I can have that, right? Maybe there is a way that if I was like, well, if I'm going to put in the work that this person does, I can have that. Um, I feel that way in my own home. And I think it starts with having really, again, a simple plan. So you have this like buy-in, I'm going to do it. And then it's knowing like, okay, so I'm ready to get started. What do I do?
Yeah.
And so, again, I don't know if that's something that you want me to walk through or not, but I mean, I can certainly give our people some.
You can definitely talk into that a little bit. You have time.
But yeah, so I think having the buy-in's the first part for people, but then having like a strategy, okay, we're ready. What do we do is the next part, because most people go, okay, we're just going to organize. And that's like a big word, or we're going to declutter. And that's a big general word. But I like to talk in specifics, like what does that look like? And what do we define as organizing? One of the biggest things I get from parents is I say, you know what? I can't get my kid to declutter or clean their room. I tell them to go upstairs and clean their room. And I go up there and it's, I open their closet and everything's in there. And I was like, one of the first keys is being specific and giving very specific directives. Like there are certain, again, your definition of what a clean room is might be, I could see the floor.
Yeah.
And somebody else's definition is, no, that means that all your clothes are in the hamper, your toys are put away, your bed is made. So being very specific in terms of the communication piece is a critical component to having these systems stick. And that's something that gets overlooked time and time again, is people just make these general, these general broad strokes of like, can you come in and organize my pantry? Well, I want to know what that looks like. To you, is organizing your pantry just getting rid of all the expired food? Is it decanting everything in clear acrylic bins? What is the level of organization? What does that look like to you? And I think that's where we need to unpack those communication pieces.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's great. And I wanted to point this out. I had this little note here. That what you're offering it's not a life hack, or like, this quick fix. This is genuine life change that there are stories. I'm sure everyone can Google this on their own, but there are stories of how, really working on decluttering, getting organized, have actually changed people's lives and marriages and their relationship with their kids and so on. Like, and it sounds like a stretch, but it really is not. And there's scientific research behind the idea of an organized environment and its relationship to productivity and just being able to make progress on the goals you set in life. Again, these are things you can Google and research on your own. So what we're talking about and what you're unpacking here, and the reason I'm so excited about it, especially as a life coach, is that this is genuine, long-term, life-lasting. If you really hold on to the principles, life change here. Like you could quite literally save your marriage by getting organized.
That's
you
it.
know.
That's me, a marriage saver. No, but I think you bring up an interesting point. You bring up an interesting point because it's good and bad, right? Like
Yeah.
the bad is it's not a one and done, right? It's not
No.
like I do this and now I'm done. I can check it off my list and be done. But the good news is incorporating it again, and this is the beauty, going back to the earlier top of the conversation, talking about motivation and Enneagram and kind of leaning into what's natural for you already and kind of just working and building up the areas that are a little bit weaker,
Yeah.
is you are creating a lifestyle, right? Whatever that lifestyle looks like for you, whether your lifestyle is minimalism, whether your lifestyle is, I just want to not come in and see, my kitchen table littered with things, whatever that looks like for you, whatever your goals, your benchmarks are, and why that's important to you. We're teaching strategies that are going to be sustainable that will then translate into other areas of your life. Like you said, it will translate if you are disciplined, and it doesn't have to be militant disciplined, but if you are disciplined with getting in these habits and routines when it comes to your physical clutter and habits, that will translate into your diet. That will translate into budgeting and finances, being intentional with that. It will translate into, exercise, all of these other areas of our life. I mean, and that's why I call my show This Organized Life, because it's not just about the space, right? That's one part of it, but it's so much bigger than that.
Yeah.
Because the happiness isn't because, like, yes, of course, when most people, when they see like an organized space, at least for me, I'm like, oh, and I have like all the birds flying around my head. But that ends quickly, right? That dopamine hit is momentary, but it's the aftermath. It's, you know what? I get to have people over and I can actually enjoy the time with my guests because I'm not scrambling for things, or I can, have more time when I come home from work to play with my kids because I don't feel like I'm trying to juggle the laundry and the 10 other million thousand things that we have to do. And so we have a system and a strategy and a way that we approach things. So it gives you this peace and it gives you a plan that you can then, again, apply in all areas of your life. And it's adaptable. That's the beauty of it.
Yeah. Now, I wanted to ask you this real quick.
Yeah.
Because I would assume it's the same, but just want to be certain of it. Is the process for decluttering at work, it would be the same process for decluttering anywhere, right? Like, I mean,
yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, that is actually a great question. So yes, it is the same. I still talk about the three main types of clutter.
Yeah.
Now, emotional clutter, when it comes to like the sentimental piece, is usually not a big thing for work, right? In most places, unless it was your own business. And this is the first thing that I did. But for most people, that's not a big thing. There could be the fear component of emotion of like, what if? And we see this a lot as it trickles into the digital clutter, which is like a subset, right? Of, how many versions of this report, fill in the blank, do I need? But yes, the process is going to be the same. You're going to look at where am I struggling with this and how am I approaching things? And my quick, just for anybody that's listening, that's like, I want to take action today. Like I want to take action. I teach this to kindergartners. I kid you not. So this strategy, if a kindergartner, like, remember that show, like, Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader? Like this, I teach it to kindergartners. So I call it my ESP method, called empty, sort, purge. When we do that,
I like that.
We are not talking about emptying the entire contents of your garage or your kitchen or even your closet.
Yeah.
We are talking about emptying a drawer. We are talking about emptying a cabinet. We are talking about emptying a shelf. So even if you were to say, I want to declutter your bookshelf that's behind you, I would say do it a shelf at a time. when you're just starting. Again, remember, you're just doing a couch to 5K. You are not a marathon runner at this point.
That's so much more manageable.
Manageable. And we do this for two reasons. We do this emptying part because we have the ability to see clearer when there's white space versus trying to needle through, I want this, I don't want this. There's too many decisions. We clear it out, and that gives us a blank slate. And it's much easier to then decide, what do I want to be intentional about putting back versus making the decision of what do I want to get rid of? Yeah. So it's just the way our brains work. The second thing is, and again, this is why we do it small. Once it's out there, like, you're in it, right? Like, now you're not, it's easier to walk away when you're like, oh, I've decluttered like 3 shirts and now I'm going to walk away. But now you're like, I'm staring at, a pile of stuff sitting here, and we don't want to leave that there. Yeah. So it gives you a finite, when this is done, I'm done, right? Yeah. It gives you that finite end. And so that helps us with hitting a goal of knowing where the finish line is. Yeah. And so you do and then your sort, so that's your empty. Your sort is you're going to sort your stuff into 4 piles. And again, this applies anywhere, in any space, in any home. It doesn't matter what age you are. So you're going to do 4 piles. You're going to have your keep pile. Keep is, I'm keeping it in this space. So it means that I'm keeping it and it's going back here, wherever that is. You then have your recycle pile, which would be something that's broken, damaged, cannot be donated. It's going to go. It's going to go in the trash or recycling. You then have your donate pile, which is, I don't use this, want this, like this, need this. I am going to pay it forward and donate it. Yeah. Then your 4th pile, and this is the pile that this is where, without having this pile, people get bottlenecked. This is your relocate pile. Your relocate pile is stuff that you want to keep, but it doesn't necessarily need to live in that space. Yeah. So I'll give you a couple of examples. A simple example would be, I was hanging a picture and in my bedroom, and I was too lazy to put the hammer back. So I left the hammer in there. So you're not going to get rid of your hammer, but you need to relocate it back to your toolbox. That's right. Okay. But, and that's easy, right? Most people can relate to that. Those are like the easy decisions, because you know that it has a home. This isn't the proper home. We're going to relocate it back. But where a lot of people get stuck, and this is the big freeing space for a lot of people, is the stuff that comes into the sentimental piece of your emotional clutter of, this is something, or I use this very infrequently, but I have a small kitchen. I'll do this one first. I have a small kitchen. I use my turkey roaster once a year, but I'm going to take up all of this real estate in my kitchen for this turkey roaster because it's a kitchen item, so it goes there. Well, just because you think it's a kitchen item, it doesn't have to live there. Yeah. When you start talking through your space as real estate, just like your time is real estate, doesn't need to live there. It can relocate because it's taking up too much of something. Your ratio is off. Yeah. But then the other thing is a keepsake. This is something that means a lot to me. I see this with parents where it's like, or kids' clothes. This was their christening dress, but they're not wearing it. So let's take it out of the closet and put it in memorabilia. Or these are grow clothes for my kids. And so, why are there so many clothes in here? Well, someone gave me hand-me-down, so I put them in the closet. Only have the stuff that you only need to have there in your space. That all of a sudden makes your keep house. So it gives you directive of what to do with these things that you want to hold on to, but then they don't need to live in that designated space. And so then the purging comes in through that whole sorting process. And then after you're done with that sorting process, you can get rid of the recycling. You can put the donate stuff where that needs to go. You can relocate the stuff that needs to go into the relocated. And then what you're hopefully left with at the end of that exercise is a mountain of stuff that started yay big and is now this big. Yeah. And you can then go through. And that is literally the playbook of how I approach each and every space.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And at this point, I want to go and there isn't much for me to organize right now, but I want to go and find something to organize because I just like I'm the type of person where I learn something new and I kind of want to put it into play right away. I want to, play with it. That's me. And that's what I want to do right now as I'm listening to you. Um, you know, have you ever, and this is my final question. I think we're at a really good point. I do have two more after this, but have you ever come across, or have you come across maybe a theme of barriers that make it difficult for people to declutter? Like, after working with people for X amount of time, X amount of years at this point, and working with different people in different spaces, different things, do you notice any patterns where it's like, man, when this is in play, or when someone's doing this, or when they have these things, it's such a hard thing to get them to really get over that hump.
Yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, I wish it was like super clear for me to say I see this one thing all the time.
Yeah,
One of the biggest challenges is especially when you're talking to one-on-one to somebody and they get it and they're responsible for their own space. Um, that's when the magic happens. But when you're dealing, and most times in the work that I do, I'm dealing with families,
yeah,
couples, most oftentimes families. And what's a pain point for one person isn't necessarily a pain point for somebody else. And like anything, most of us don't have the impetus for change until something becomes a pain point for us. And so the challenge, again, a lot of it has to do with communication. And this is where knowing the Enneagram has been really helpful for me to even facilitate conversations between couples and kids and families and whatnot.
yeah,
But there are certain, different styles and thresholds that people have for clutter, where some people are like what I call allergic to clutter and they stress out. And also people that tend to, yes, you're pointing at yourself. And then other people that I call them clutter blind, where they're the people that can just literally walk past the breakfast dishes out with
yeah.
like the half-eaten piece of toast. And I'm just like,
And
how
they're
did you
perfectly
walk?
fine.
And I'm like, they just don't even say it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
it's kind of blending. How do you get somebody to want to take action on something that isn't causing them stress and a pain point? I also, again, in my work, I would say the majority of people that I work with, not all, but a lot of the people I work with are kind of busy families. So there's a lot of external things going back to counter clutter that come into play. So we hit these times of day, these roadblocks, these seasons that are natural kind of breeding grounds for clutter, like before school, after school, we're running to activities, we're doing this, and we end up being in survival mode, and we're more reactive than proactive. And
yeah,
as a result, our spaces become a dumping ground. And I always say, like, your house in the broad sense shouldn't be a drop spot, right? We have designated drop spots. You have drop spots for your keys, drop spots for here. Your house shouldn't be a drop spot.
yeah,
And when you're so busy, and this again I don't want to not give importance and weight to people that don't have kids. This could be for somebody that's working, 16-hour days and is involved in tons of different things, community service, whatever it is. But when your attention is elsewhere and you're not being intentional about the space, then your home becomes a drop spot. And
yeah,
that's where we kind of get into this cycle. And, for anybody that's tried to eat well and they fall, it's so hard to get to that milestone, and it's so easy for it to come back, like,
yeah,
and so I see that with people in their spaces where like they've been really organized, they've been keeping up, and then going back to our situational clutter, something goes, a little sideways, and we kind of all get a little sloppy,
yeah,
so to speak. And then we just throw in the towel and say, forget it, we're destined. Where it's like, nope, we just need to kind of regroup, redirect. And sometimes it even means we need to change things up because what we
yeah.
were doing before that was working isn't working for us now.
Yeah.
So it's a fluid process and it's ongoing, but having those conversations, I think, is really the most important part. And if you do live with other people, whether it's a roommate, whether it's a spouse, whether it's parent child, having that ownership mindset and being like, this is what's important. You own this. I own this. You're responsible for this. Like, what are the boundaries that we're going to set? I know for me, people ask me, like, is my house perfect or my kids' room's perfect? My kids are far from organized and perfect. They have their strengths and they have their weaknesses, but they know that there's certain like common denominators. We have common spaces that they're allowed to, of course, they're allowed to like make a mess, but they know that at the end of the day, they need to clean it up if it's in a common space. If they want their room to be a mess, I'll shut the door. That's their private space, until a certain point. No gray gardens. We're not like going to have like rodents, but we have to figure out when we live with other people, what our threshold, because again, what stresses you out might not stress me out. So how can we find that kind of blend happy medium so that everybody feels like they're being seen and heard?
Yeah. My wife and I had to work through that when we first got married and, first moved in together. There's a lot of figuring out. Like for me, clearly, clutter is a stressor for me. For her, she didn't necessarily like it, but it didn't bother her as much. And so just figuring that out. And one of the things that we found helpful, and I'm curious to know if this is something that if you do, or maybe you suggest for other people, is just having kind of a check-in point. So like, once or twice a year where it's, basically on the calendar, whether it's like spring cleaning or fall, organizing or whatever the case is. And there's just kind of a check-in point where, oh, okay, well, what are our systems? Have any of our systems changed? What works for us now that maybe didn't work before, vice versa. Um, and in doing that, it's become very, very helpful.
That's awesome. I mean, I'll be honest, like I haven't necessarily set it up in terms of like a scheduled meeting. I've treated it more like this should be sort of an organic, ongoing thing of like, where are we in this particular season of our life with our kids, with our marriage, with whatever. And
Yeah.
there are going to be times where my husband was traveling and I would have to pick up a lot of slack, and then the division of labor would shift again because it's not always going to be 50-50.
Yeah.
It just, I
Yeah.
mean, again, a partnership, it's going to be, where are we and are both of our needs being met? And again, I was not resentful that I was maybe carrying a lot of the weight, so to speak, of household and domestic and responsibilities. Um, because I know that he was doing other things that were of equal priority for our family.
Yeah.
And I think where people start to get resentful and break down and then like just draw that like line in the sand is when they feel that it's like this unfair division where I'm doing everything and then that resentment comes in.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
not the maid. I'm not picking up your stuff. I am tired of making dinner or doing and so it all comes back to communication. Is where are we? And I do think it's helpful. And if it's something that you're not in a habit of having those regular conversations, then yes, scheduling it as a monthly check-in, a quarterly check-in to say kind of like, let's look ahead. Like what do we know? Because we all know there's going to be stuff that's going to pop up that's unplanned and unexpected.
Oh yeah.
Right. That's a given. But what do we know? Like, do you have a busy travel schedule, or are the kids is this like a really busy season for the kids? Like, I know my kids got soccer practice, so it's going to be really hard for me to make dinner on these nights because we're going to be out of the house.
Yeah.
Just having those communication pieces, then you can both together as a team strategize on, okay, so should we do a meal prep service? Should we just say we're going to have pizza night on Wednesdays? Do we want to do crock pot meals? What do we want to do to address this? Because something's got to give.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, this is we're winding down for everyone listening, but I do want to remind everyone that you do a lot. You don't just teach on this stuff. Clearly, we've mentioned your podcast, This Organized Life, which I think everyone should go check out. If you drop gems on there the way you're dropping them here, I mean that I need to live on that podcast. However, you also have online courses. You have a plethora of free downloadable resources on so many different aspects of just getting organized and improving the quality of your life through having some clarity and some systems in place. I mean, you have a lot that you offer to folks. Do you have anything coming up, whether it's an event or workshop, or maybe you have a book coming? I don't
Oh,
know.
you're so sweet.
Do you have anything coming up that you're excited about that
I
you want
do.
anyone to know?
Well, thank you. And I'll give a shout out. So, and I appreciate that. It's very kind. I'm not a big words of affirmation person. Like, I don't know if you're 5 love languages. I'm all about acts of service. So I get very you know, embarrassed when people start to say nice things about me, but I do appreciate it. And yeah, I do offer, just real quick before I get into my event, I am very intentional about having a lot of free resources. Whether it's the podcast, which we've got over 300 episodes, but also free checklists and downloads and tons of stuff out there, because I believe wholeheartedly that everybody, regardless of age, race, economic status, everyone deserves to live an organized life, whatever that looks like to you, whatever that looks like. And not everybody is in a position, nor do they want to hire a professional organizer to come in. And that's okay. But we all can benefit from learning how to be the best version of ourselves in whatever way that is. So yes, I've, by design, again, over the decade plus that I've been doing this, have just cultivated lots and lots of free content for people that they can devour however they would like. So that being said, one of the other things that I do is, again, because my time is limited and I can't be in people's homes the way I used to be, or as many homes as I want to be, is I align and partner with other professional organizers from all over the globe in all different cities. And it's a way for me to be able to give a trusted referral, my stamp of approval, my SBO endorsed.
Yeah.
If you live in wherever, San Francisco, Columbia, South Carolina, whatever, if you need an organizer, chances are we have one in our network, or we know somebody who does, so that you can come and, again, there's a lot of people out there, but we want to bring people into our lives, anyone, doctors, hairdressers, electricians, whatever it is that we know, like, and trust. And so we have that. And so part of that is basically a way for me to mentor and help these professional organizers with their business. And so every year we come together once a year, since we're all spread out, and do a retreat. It's a 4-day retreat for professional organizers. And we pick a different venue. And selfishly, I pick places that I want to go. So we've been to Nashville, we've been to Austin. And this year we are going to Scottsdale. I'm not sure when this episode is going to drop, but we'll be there in Scottsdale the beginning of November. So anybody that's listening that's in Scottsdale, hook me up, look me up, and we'll hook up there. And so, yeah, it's a retreat for professional organizers. So that's something that I'm looking forward to, because as much as I get to teach and speak into these other women, I've learned from them as well. I think I learn from my clients. I learn from the other people who I mentor. And I think it's important to know that, education, whether it's in a formal or informal setting, coaching, mentoring, it's an important thing that we all do. Yeah. And so I'm blessed to be able to have this opportunity. So that's what I have. Awesome. And I'm working on a book on Enneagram and clutter. And I said it'll be out in 20 something or other. But you'll be the first to know. You'll be the first to know. Yeah.
Please let me know. I'd love to have you on again and talk about it.
Yes, for sure.
That's amazing. Now just jumping back to the event.
Briefly, for sure.
What's happening at the event? Is it training? Is it
so it's really fun. It's a little bit of both. So interestingly enough, the majority of the women who are attending, it just happens to be, it's not only open to women, but it just so happens that the people that are coming are women. And if you are a professional organizer and you're listening and you're interested in it, seriously, shoot me a DM or whatever. They all run and operate their own professional organizing businesses. So they obviously small business owners doing a lot. Many of them, not all, but many of them are married with kids. So they're juggling all the family stuff. So they're all constantly doing for other people. So
Yeah.
I intentionally wanted to design something that was turnkey, almost like an all-inclusive, like, here you go. And you just have to figure out how to get there since they're coming from all over. They just have to figure out if it's planes, trains, or automobiles that they're going to get there. And everything else is done. So it's an all-inclusive, and it's a mix of team building activities, conference style breakouts. I bring in speakers in different subject matter experts, whether it's social media, legal, website. And then we have, again, team dinners, activities, as well as some free time for some R&R. Because
That's
again, we're
awesome.
talking about a lot of a group of women who are caregivers, and whether it's to our clients, whether it's to our families, friends, whatever. And so I want to, offer them an opportunity to not have to think and make decisions. We touched on decision fatigue being a big thing.
Yeah.
So we plan the whole weekend out for them. So literally they pay, they show up, and everything from Thursday night to Sunday is done for them, planned for them. And
I love it.
that's it.
I love it. That's
so
awesome.
It's great. Yeah, it's great. It's a lot of fun. We had to take a pause the pandemic year of 2020, but we picked right back up last year. And it's awesome. And what I love about it also is it's not a huge conference style. It's a retreat in the sense that we max out at like 20 people.
Yeah.
So it's intimate. We are sitting around a conference table. We are talking. We are going to breakout sessions. So not that there's anything wrong with conference style learning. I love it. And I think that it's great, but there's something to be said for that one-on-one small group breakout sessions.
Absolutely.
Where you're really able to kind of be vulnerable and authentic and dig deep and talk about kind of goal setting and just hit the pause button about our businesses.
Yeah.
And that's really my goal. So
that's awesome.
yes.
I love that.
Thank you.
And I think if anyone listening missed it, with the max out at 20, you want to get on this as soon as possible. I'm just going to emphasize that. Don't miss it, especially for me as an introvert. As I hear that, I'm thinking that sounds like an amazing weekend. And personally, I love Nashville. Almost moved there actually.
Oh my God, Nashville's awesome. Yes, we will talk about that. Yeah.
Such good food there. Oh my goodness.
I'm a foodie. So everywhere we go, I'm all like, what's the restaurant scene? Because
listen, the best food I've ever had on any trip / vacation is in Portland. The best food.
Which one? Oregon
Portland,
or Maine?
Oregon.
Okay.
Oregon.
Okay.
Although I've heard Maine has really good food. I haven't been there yet.
Okay.
But, I mean, I've been to a ton of amazing places. I love the food in Portland, Oregon.
All right. If I go to Portland, I'm hitting you up and you're going to give me all the places.
Send me an email. I will send you a list.
I will.
List. So if someone wants to hop on this opportunity to be a part of this retreat, or they just want to book you to speak or hire you or just learn more, what do they love?
The best thing to do is just go to my website. It's the hub for everything. It's simply the letter B like boy organize.com. And I'm sure you'll link to it in your show notes.
Yep.
From there, you can connect up with me about all things: book, podcast, speaking, the retreat, whatever you need. So that's your choose your own adventure. Just go there and you can find me. Obviously, I'm all over social media, but that's just go to the website. It's the easiest place.
Awesome. And like you said, all of that will be linked, including your social media, and everything will be linked in the description of this episode. So if you're listening and you are convinced by now, hopefully, that this is something worth checking out, you can, before the end of this episode, just tap that link and you'll be taken directly to Laurie's website. Man, I've so enjoyed this conversation. Such an insightful and informative conversation. I learned so much. Thank you for sharing with me.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. I really enjoyed it. And I hope that people walked away with some nuggets of wisdom and feeling a little bit more inspired and empowered to just reclaim the parts that maybe have been a little bit hidden under some unnecessary clutter in their lives.
Yeah. And one of the things you did, Laurie, was you made the entire process sound realistic. It did not sound or feel overwhelming or daunting. As we spoke, you made it sound so attainable, and I love that. And I love that you I'm gonna say blessed my audience with that and myself. Guys, that is it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. Man, be sure to check out Laurie's links. Follow her on social. I know I already have started to follow her on some of her socials. I'm gonna look up the rest of them now and make sure I'm following. And until next time, man, thank you so much for hanging out with us. Take care. That's it for today's episode. I truly hope you enjoyed the show. To learn more about today's guests, including the links and resources related to everything we discussed, visit the podcast page at paulwcroswell.com, where you can find the entire podcast archive, as well as information about my book titled Life Balance, as well as the Life Balance Planner, and much, much more. If you'd like to support the podcast, the easiest and most impactful thing that you can do is subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and on YouTube. Also, leaving a positive review or comment is also important and greatly appreciated. Sharing the show or your favorite episode with friends or on social media is, of course, awesome and very helpful. Finally, for podcast updates, special offers on the Life Balance Planner, online courses, and more, please subscribe to our newsletter. You can find a link to do so in the show notes.